We will be learning about a new chapter called Forest Society and Colonialism. Lot of diversity is fastly disappearing. Diversity means variety of life forms existing on the earth. So, day by day, this diversity is disappearing. Between the year 1700 and 1995, the period of industrialization, during this period, 13.9 million square kilometers of forest or 9.3% of the world's total area was cleared for industrial uses, cultivation purpose, pastures and fuel wood. So if we are cutting forest, then the diversity is disappearing. So why are we cutting forest? Why deforestation? The process of deforestation began many centuries ago, but under the colonial rule, it became more systematic and extensive. We are cutting forests because population is increasing, more people, we need land, development of city, furniture purpose and other usage. In the early 19th century, colonial state thought that forests were unproductive. Forests were considered to be the wilderness that had to be bought under cultivation. Forests were considered to be the wilderness that had to be bought under cultivation so that land could yield agricultural products and revenue. So forests were cleared because it could be bought under agricultural lands and then it could enhance the income of the state. By the early 19th century, oak forests in England were disappearing. This created a problem of timber supply to the navy. And then the spread of the railways from 1850s, it created a new demand. To run all these engines, wood was needed as a fuel, and to lay the railway lines, sleepers were essential to hold the tracks together. Forests around the railway tracks fastly started disappearing. The rise of commercial forestry. British were worried that use of forest by the local people and reckless felling of the trees by the traders would destroy the forests. So they decided to invite a German expert named Dietrich Brandis for advice and made him the first Inspector General of Forests in India. In this image, we see the forest was divided into scientific forestry and natural forestry. Brandis realized that a proper system had to be introduced to manage the forest and people had to be trained regarding the science of conservation. In this image, we see the cutting of the trees for timber for wood purpose. Brandis set up the Indian Forest Service in the year 1864. He helped in formulating the Indian Forest Act of 1865. Imperial Forest Research Institute was set up at Dehradun in the year 1906. The system taught in this institute was known as scientific forestry. In scientific forestry, the natural forests which had lots of different types of trees, they were cut down and in their place one type of tree was planted in all the straight rows. This is also known as plantation. The 1878 Act divided forests into three categories: reserved, protected and village forests. Best forests were known as reserve forests. How were the lives of people affected? Villagers wanted forest with a mixture of species to satisfy the different needs such as fuel, fodder and leaves. The forest department, they wanted trees which were suitable for building ships or railways, and they needed trees that could provide hardwood. They were very tall and straight. So particular species like teak, sal, they were promoted and the other trees were cut down. Forest Act meant severe hardships for all the villagers across the country. So after this Forest Act, all their everyday practices like cutting the wood for houses, grazing the cattle, collecting fruits, roots, hunting, fishing, all this became illegal. So people were forced to steal the wood from the forest, and if they were caught, they would bribe the forest guards and take the mercy from them. How did the forest rules affect the cultivation? So, in this shifting cultivation, the parts of the forests are cut and burned in rotation. Seeds are sown in the ashes after the first monsoon rains, and the crops are harvested by October or November. And such plots are cultivated for a couple of years and then they are left to fallow for about 12 to 18 years for the forest to grow back again. So this mixture of crops is grown on these plots. In this image we see the shifting cultivation. Cultivation of crops and again allowing the forest to regrow. So European foresters, they regarded this practice as harmful for the forests. They felt that land which was used for cultivation every few years could not grow trees for railway timber. When a forest was burnt, there was added danger of the flames spreading and burning all the valuable timber. So therefore the government decided to ban the shifting cultivation. Who could hunt? Before the forest laws came, people who lived in the forest or near the forest survived by hunting deer, partridges, and many varieties of small animals. This practice was prohibited by the forest laws, and those who were caught hunting were now being punished for poaching. So, in this image, we see who could hunt before forest laws and after forest laws. They gave rewards for the killing of tigers, wolves, and large animals on the grounds that they posed a threat to the cultivators. Initially, certain areas of forests were reserved for hunting, and much later only environmentalists and conservators they begin to argue that all the species of animals are needed to be protected and not killed. New traders, new employments, and new services. Many communities they left their traditional occupations and they started trading in the forest products. This happened not only in India but in many countries across the world. In India, the trade of forest products was not new. From the medieval period onwards, we have records of the Adivasis communities trading the elephants and goods such as hides, horns, silk cocoons, ivory, bamboo, spices, etc. British government gave many large European trading firms the sole right to trade in the forest products of particular areas. Grazing and hunting by the local people was completely restricted. In this image we see the new trades, employments and services. Rebellion in the forests. So in India and also across the world, the forest communities they rebelled against the changes that were being imposed on them. Let's see how different communities responded to these changes. The people of Bastar they believed that each village was given its land by the earth and in return they'd look after the earth by making some offerings at every agricultural festival. If people from a village they want to take some wood from the forests of another village, they would pay a small fee called devasari, dand, or a man in exchange. And some villages also protected their forests by engaging watchmen and each household contributes some grain to pay them. Every year there is one big hunt where the headman of the villages in a paragana, that means a cluster of villages, they meet, discuss the issues of concerns including the forests. In this image we see people performing annual agricultural festivals. Fears of the people. When the colonial government, British government, they proposed to reserve two-thirds of the forest in 1905 and stop shifting cultivation, hunting and collection of forest produce, the people of Bastar were very worried. Villagers were allowed to stay on in the reserved forests on the conditions that they worked for free in the forest department in cutting and transportation of trees, protecting the forest from fires. So subsequently these came to be known as forest villages. So in this image we see British people attracting the villagers with some amount. Forest transformations in Java. Java is a place in Indonesian country. It is where the Dutch people started the forest management. Like the British, they also wanted timber from Java to build the ships. Java in 1600 was 3.4 million. There were many villages in the fertile plains, and there were also communities living in the mountains and practicing shifting cultivation. The woodcutters of Java. When the Dutch began to gain control over the forests in the 18th century, they tried to make the Kalangs work under them, but in 1770 the Kalangs resisted them by attacking a Dutch fort at Jona. But this uprising was very much suppressed. In this image we see the woodcutters. Scientific forestry. Dutch first imposed rents on the land being cultivated in the forests, and then they exempted some villages from these rents if they worked collectively to provide free labor and buffaloes for cutting and transporting the timber. This was known as Blandong-Diensten system. Later, instead of rent exemption, forest villagers were given very small wages, but their right to cultivate the forest land was also restricted. Samin's challenge. Surontiko Samin of Randuplantung village, a teak forest village, he began questioning the state ownership of the forests. He argued that state had not created the wind, water, earth or wood, so it could not own it. Soon a widespread movement developed. War and deforestation. In Java, just before the Japanese people occupied this region, Dutch followed a scorched earth policy, which means destroying the sawmills, burning huge piles of giant teak logs so that they would not fall into the Japanese hands. After the war with the Japanese, it was difficult for the Indonesian Forest Service to get the land back. Same as in India, people's need for agricultural land, it brought them into conflict with the forest department's desire to control the land and exclude the people from it. New developments in forestry. Conservation of the forests. Conservation of the forests. Rather than collecting the timber, this became an important goal. The government recognized that in order to meet this goal, government recognized that it is necessary to meet this goal, and villagers have been patrolling their own forests, with each household taking in turns instead of leaving it to the forest guards. So not only forest guards, but the people of villages were also taking part in protecting the forest and conservation of the forests. Local forest communities and environmentalists today, they are thinking of different forms of forest management techniques.